Question, a comment? You can go to the restroom.
No, I was. You're so authoritative as a teacher that I just. But I do have a question.
Okay.
Dane, so congrats. This is awesome. Having gone through this exercise, does it make you want to write more now, or was it just an exercise to fulfill the need for the requirement, or do you feel the need now and the desire to continue to write?
After writing roughly 8,000 words, I'm good for a moment. I don't foresee morphing professionally into playwriting. This was a project for me and to share with others, but it wasn't for monetary reasons. So I enjoyed it, but I also don't know that I am interested in taking on commissions and whatnot. So this served a specific purpose for me on my journey, not a professional pursuit.
Yes.
Do you have hopes for this to go further? Do you want to see this fully produced and staged on a theater stage?
I would not discount that, but I'm not actively thinking I'm going to push it out there and try to get it published and produced. I almost see, because I think each of the scene can be a standalone scene, that they could be part of acting classes and acting exercises, as opposed to a full project.
Do you want to tell everybody just a little bit about your process and the project?
Sure. So I've been studying for the past 2 years to get my MFA in interdisciplinary arts. So I came to it with an established practice of theater making as a director and an actor and an educator. So I didn't go to school to continue learning the craft of acting. I went to further expand it and to see what became of my experiences and how they would move forward. So Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont is a John Dewey progressive school that does not have prescribed courses. You go in with an idea of what you want to explore, create a study plan, and then decide how you want to learn and how you want to engage in that. So you have an advisor every semester. You come up with a list of works you want to engage with, and then get into responses and see what happens and where it morphs and how it moves. So when I came in, I had no goal of playwriting. I came in with the idea of exploring non-Western theater and expanding my understanding of how other non-US folk engage in storytelling. And that led to me finding a lot of resources on folks who use storytelling and theater to deal with grief and to deal with trauma and to find resiliency and healing through that, whether it be tribal communities in Africa, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and moved from that into exploring some Buddhism. And so just trying to get a more expansive understanding of the world around me and how I currently interact with it and how I would like to interact with it more fully. So that began to develop into really looking at Southern playwrights and how grief enters our vocabulary a good bit, and also how in America grief and death and loss have become a business and have been structured to money, and how we are not given the chance to fully grieve our losses in our own time, as opposed to being a day 1 you do this, day 2 you do that, day 3, day 4 you're back to work, right? what does that mean? Because we don't talk about it. We don't have the village aspect that other folks still have. So that's where this began, to figure out how I could use my experiences and my theater making to export them into a play that could open up conversations for those who experience it together.
I have a question. Yeah, not a question, more of a comment. The beginning of that, of your play here, the grief part really resonated. But throughout, what I loved about was the communication and the desire from the father to the son. You can see he was really trying to open up and bridge that gap and not make trying to recover the mistakes of his father and grandfather, and he's trying to make a connection with his son. That, the emotional part, it went all the way through, so mission accomplished.
I have a twofold question, because I'm sure it's difficult to like trust somebody else to tell your story, any part of your story, but like trusting somebody else with your grief is incredibly vulnerable. So I'm curious as to what the process has been like for you, and then I'm also curious as to what it has been like to try and play someone else's grief with them in the room, and how that process worked in the rehearsal.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have these wonderful folk who came along on the journey. Thank you. For a long time, it was very challenging for me to vocalize my experience and put up lots of walls throughout my journey to this point. So I had to make a concerted effort to know that I was having some unresolved feelings that I wanted to share with folks. So just making that first step, and then reaching out to Pat and Michael and saying, would you help me so that I can just be playwright, and try to stay in my lane and try to not be the director or the actor, and just to give it over and let them to take flight with it. That was as much a part of the finding the resilience in the grief as anything else.
Alan and Stephen, do y'all want to comment on how it is to play someone else's grief when they're in the room?
Just Pat and Dane and Pat and Michael were leaders and creative folks that helped us discover our way through it, and I just tried to do my part as best I could, and I relied a lot on the feedback that I got to help me discover the piece and serve the piece. And I think the writing's very powerful. So speaking for myself, I was able to make meaningful connections from an actor's point of view, and I got ongoing feedback. So that was a really important piece. And you just kind of get in, and you do your process that you know, and your team keeps you on track. I think it's a team effort, and you certainly have to. We're all part of the team. We all have our own plan. So for me, it was really personal, just because there were ways I could really relate to the characters and the piece.
you don't want to fuck up, right?
I think that was the last one.
It was. I mean, it's such a privilege. Anytime you get to perform a playwright's piece with direct feedback from the playwright. This piece in particular, it's a privilege, and to quote Laramie, you want to say it right, you want to say it correct, and yeah, you just want to be careful, hold the words close. And, it's really cool. Today we were talking about, I asked Michael and Pat about a line, and we were talking about it, and then we were like, well, dang, and so yeah, it's a privilege.
So Dana, she wrote this, and as you wrote it and rewrote it and retooled it, and probably read it out loud, and went, did you feel like you were telling your story, and every time you told a little more, it became less of a heavy grief? And now that you've put it sort of on its feet in a chair, and now it's been told to all of us, do you feel like you've kind of taken some of it off and put it on us? Does that feel like that to you?
Yeah, and I think it ebbed and flowed also, depending on where I was in the day or what I was going through, affected how it touched me. But you say read it aloud. I use Google dictation a good bit to do all this writing, so I would speak it as the character into the Google, and it would type it, then I'd go back up and clean it. But yes, one thing I've also been studying is the ritual of grief, and that we are providing containers for each other of grief to go and let it metabolize. So tonight you all have helped me metabolize, and perhaps, hopefully, helped metabolize your own inner grief that you might be dealing with.
Where did you get this gorgeous quote? I mean, how'd you come up on that?
It's one of my resources. It's a book that I have read this summer, and it's a great book if you want to find it on Amazon. It's really a powerful book.
Yes.
When in the process did you decide to use imagery to kind of punctuate these scenes?
I think with Michael and Pat, we were talking, and I thought that I might want to include some imagery there to help reinforce. But I think we also didn't want to show it at the beginning. We wanted you to visualize for yourself, and then,
Yeah.
And like the photo of the ring was taken. I've had huge support from my family at Indian Springs. So that was on the Indian Springs Lake. I was in my kayak, and I was telling that story in my phone, recording it, and that picture was from that day in March.
Yes.
I was going to say, I'm such a big fan of you and your practice and everything. I thought the imagery was really great, and it took me a while as I was processing it all that there wasn't a last image, right?
It was the image of the paperwork.
Wait, what?
The paperwork, all the.
Oh, that was the last image? Okay. Sorry.
Yes.
So for Dan, I want to know where you go from here, not necessarily with this piece, because I know you've already talked about it, but now that you've done all this research, this work, this personal work, like what's next for you just in your career or journey?
The journey for this process goes in a week and a half for my last residency of grad school. So I'll go to Vermont the last week of July, and I will begin the thesis writing proper at that point. So I've got a critical response essay, which is going to incorporate the 5 Gates of Grief, which Francis Weller talks about, another great resource, and the Pretchell book, and Bittersweet, a Susan Cain book, and Shamanic Tradition and Rituals with Langston Kahn, and talking about how the grief includes ancestral, it includes environmental and ecological, social, political, all these things that it's not just one type of grief, right? And then exploring where those pop up in different plays that I have found. From Next to Normal to a lot of Beth Henley plays, Sam Shepard, Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, and then delving into at that point how it morphed into creating a play with using all of this information. So that takes me through to finish the work around Thanksgiving. And then I'll have an expensive piece of paper on my wall.
But how will all of this that you've learned,
Yeah.
research, affect your work beyond the graduation day?
I think that so far in my work in high school, with those young actors and creative people in the classroom and in rehearsals, I have become a more grounded person. I'm much less easy to fly off the rail.
Much less easy.
And I take time, and I try not to let product be the value of it. The process of getting to the product is the value of it, and the journey is going to be different for everyone. So continuing to develop that and share that with other theater directors and other creative folks. So hopefully we can dialogue and change the models of the mid-1900 authoritative director types. You go here, 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 and be more open and collaborative and understanding of process, as opposed to just focusing on that opening night.
You know, I know that Pat and Michael were your teachers, right? And Dave and
And Alan.
sat in on a class with them, God, years ago with Michael. But what a gift to see him grow, and a gift for you to have them on this journey with you. I mean, it's just, and you probably been along the way too, Alan, right? You were around there, I mean, you were there at school too, right? I don't know if you were teaching.
It was a real,
Teaching
real
with
honor
Dave
and
is-
a
that's
gift to be
something,
part of.
but it's just, to see, you know, looking at you right now, just, well, I wanted to.
Yes, okay. When it started, as has been said, it was very good. I really enjoyed it, and I went somewhere else because I recently saw a movie with Morgan Freeman dealing with trains. And he had a quote at the beginning, and it was dealing with some grief and some death. Spoiler alert, I won't do that. But I like that flow, that connection, and just the whole idea of trains. And he had one in the basement on a big table and everything. And it was delightful. And as Celeste said, with the quote at the beginning, as it was read, and as I read it, and it went down, it was a lot. As you can see it back here, it hit home, and it shows how universal, that death and grief are, and you can't get away from it. And I think you said it's about just dealing with it and talking about it, and knowing that it's part of the process, part of the circle of life that we have to go through. That was good.
think I saw a hand over here somewhere.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of a random question, Nate. So I know you came at this project from a purely writing process, and the goal of it was very different from any kind of theater you normally would have taken on, like in your job or in your life normally as a director. But I'm curious, if the director piece of you stayed completely out of your process, or if as you were writing it, you think, how would I stage that? And if you did, if the director piece of you did come into that process, I'm curious, if you were reading your work as a director, what would have been your thoughts about staging it?
Staging did not come into play. I think Michael once said it seems more like a movie screenplay more than a stage play because of the locations. So I pretty much stayed away from the directing hat. And I was reluctant initially to put so much descriptive stage direction in there. But with my advisors, we decided it might benefit from that to kind of help flesh out the southern aspect of the story.
Is it frozen? Or did you hear something tonight and you thought, you know what, I'm gonna change that? When's the
sorry?
last time you touched it and changed words?
She said, is it frozen or?
Oh no, it'll continue
Okay,
a life. Yeah.
so it's not necessarily done.
No,
Okay.
no. The last edit was on the 15th, so 3 days ago.
And speaking of the director thing too, I feel like I love you telling us that you used the Google app, because so much of it's your voice. And I think because this room is full of people who love you, we can hear you so clearly, but I appreciate them fighting against that and just finding truth in the moment and in the characters, because it would be very easy in those moments where you guys were what, to just be well, how would Dane say it? You know what I mean? Because you can hear you. But I think you guys did an excellent job of just finding the truth in it instead of how it should sound, you know?
I'm glad Tawny brought that up because I was thinking about that as well. And listening for Dane in the performance. Yeah, that's good.
You mentioned, and this has all come up already, but you mentioned not thinking about staging because it's sort of more like a screenplay, but I wondered if you thought about the casting as you were writing it, or as you were doing this. I didn't know these were your former teachers. I didn't know this was going to be such an autobiographical play when I came here. I mean, I know you, but it's kind of interesting how much that, in the idea of you being a director and sort of directing the play as you're writing it. I was wondering if you had an idea, this is a staging, so, I mean, you are staging it as a reading, and you would have to do it differently on the stage, I guess, but, or maybe you wouldn't. I just wondered how much did you think of who would actually perform this for you? And on the other side, if you're a director, how did you cast this? Was it just Dane's friends or mentors, or was it more, I mean, I know that wasn't on yet, but I'm just kind of curious to know what went into it. Because it's such a personal thing, and how do you distance yourself from that? And going forward, if this is going to be a play that's not just about your journey, which already it isn't, but whether you've learned stuff along here that you would change, or that, I don't know if I have a question there or not.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Dane sat in all the rehearsals and never said a word unless we had questions for clarification.
When we all looked at him and said, can you help us here?
Otherwise, otherwise he left all of it to us, to interpret, to move it the way we saw it out of what he had written.
I think you did a wonderful job. I loved it. But,
Well, I was just saying that he was very deliberate in staying out of any directorial or interpretive input. He only really spoke up with clarification.
Well, but to push back a little bit, you have somebody who said, I didn't want to fuck up. So
That's right.
what I'm saying is, I'm just kind of curious to know how much, if this was not Dane's play, how different would it have been? or different at all? As a process, as a.
We definitely felt like we really wanted to do the very best we could for him.
Yeah.
We really felt both the honor and the
I'm
responsibility.
hoping this isn't coming across as hostile. I mean,
No,
that's-
not at all. It's not at all.
And we
Yeah.
just simply reached out to Stephen and Alan and said, hey, Dane's working on this project.
And we
There are a
can't
couple
find
of
anybody
roles."
else to do it.
Well, I am curious though. I am curious, and this is not a jab at ourselves, but really, if we're looking at the timeline and the ages,
Yeah.
you would be dad age,
Yeah.
and there would be like a 20-year-old playing your son.
But I look young.
We're all gonna keep telling ourselves that, aren't we? But I feel like, is that a direction you would go towards if you did it in the future? Or would you keep, because there's also some depth to having some life experience and casting older. So I'm curious as to.
I'm old as dirt. I'm old enough to be his dad.
Right, no, but I mean like,
Right.
yeah, like taking it a stage down. I don't know, and would a 20-year-old, like, to me, that opening up to of sexuality and like that's a different moment when it's a younger, more vulnerable person having to say those things.
Well, I think in a situation like this, we're thinking, all right, two really good actors, being, right? And who have a connection with Dane and who will want to jump in and commit to a rehearsal period and do the work. And so in this setting, I think that was really important.
Yeah, I think you got two of the best actors you could possibly get.
But you are right. According to what the script says, it would be a 20-something and probably a 40.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask Michael and Pat, have you ever directed together? I know that you were both, I've been directed by each of you separately. Have you ever worked on a project together, and how was that process?
Well, she directs me every day.
We directed each other as actors, and I've choreographed for him when he's directed. I don't know that we've ever co-directed anything.
And this was your first time to direct a new piece.
It was. Yeah. Yes, it was.
I just want to say that the writing and the narration, that was absolutely perfect. And the reason why I'm saying that is that my mind goes back to the late 30s, early 40s, even though I wasn't there, I'm just above that. But the radio, on how the television shows, the acting took place over the radio, and you were able to accomplish all of that, then more, without the sound effects, because of the writing and the narration. So it definitely put you there without having the sound effects like they used to have back in the day. Yeah, very good. Very good.
You mentioned putting in so many stage directions because more than you thought you would to emphasize the southern, northern difference. How would you do that as a play differently? I mean, if you didn't have the stage directions, how would you do that?
I guess I was just, that was, I say that I'll backtrack. A year ago when I first dabbled with just trying to write some stuff before I got into this process, that's where I was thinking, because I was coming at it from a director, not a playwright. I was thinking, well, as a director, I'll figure this out. I don't need to be told, right? And I also didn't want to try to be too heavy-handed as a playwright and say to the director, this is what it's got to be, because I want to give some room for interpretation. But I got over that.
I will say, just as an audience member, and especially, of course, this is a stage reading, so the stage directions do help a lot, but it did feel almost like a character. It felt like an additional character and a very important part of the story. And I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it.
So I'm trying to think of what is southern versus northern. I mean, Pops obviously is northern. But other than that, I'm not sure what would have been.
There's, I think the idea of living outside a lot, as we do in the South, with the front porch and the back deck and the, fishing right outside the back door. I think all the heart of the house, kind of everything revolves around that. So I think that's where I was going with it. And also, sort of like Mark Twain, I wrote a lot of dialect into the dialogue. I think it could be done in, I don't know that the South is where it has to live. And I don't know that gender is entirely important. I think I would give permission to anyone to explore based on what they need to tell their audience and who their audience is. So
I think I would be really disappointed if this didn't continue on, if it didn't get performed in high schools especially. You said it'd be a great teaching tool. I'd really like to see that. I would be personally disappointed if it didn't. I think it opens up a lot.
Just in terms of stage directions, I mean, as a designer, I usually ignore them. And I think that they really help, even if you're talking about doing like a full production, give a sense of the poeticness of it and of the nostalgia of the location. And so even if they're not in the future read, I think that a production team can really use those stage directions in ways that very often we don't. Because I don't want to put the table on stage right next to the door that's
Before we leave, I think we're starting to wind down a little bit, but before we leave, there are a couple of questions that Dane wanted to ask you. And one of those is, how can a play, this one for example, empower an audience to deal with grief? Or can a play, can theater engage an audience in a way that helps process grief?
Yes.
I'll comment and say, yeah, it's really kind of funny because my parents are still alive, both, but they're elderly, and I'm kind of going through a pre-grief thing at the moment. I'm kind of going through a grief, knowing that eventually something's going to happen in a short amount of time. So this is kind of a cathartic thing for me. Just the timing is kind of really good. My sister was here this week, and we sat for hours talking about all of this, and so, yeah, it affects you greatly. And I think I was actually going to ask you, Stephen, like how this has affected you. Thinking about, I know you well, and I know how things that you are in affect you, because we talked about that in the past, and I just wondered how this might have affected you, and made you think differently, and made you feel like, I think it's always hard for us to, and maybe it's a Southern thing, we always say that it's hard for us to deal with grief, and it's, I was raised in a family that, everything's wonderful and perfect, we float along with the perfect, and so things like this open up like emotions in me that help me deal with things that I was kind of taught not to deal with my entire life. So,
for me personally, my father, who's still living, is I've pushed aside a lot of our differences and his, what I feel, lack of understanding about emotion and lack of capacity to offer support in emotion. But this really shoved it in my face and made me see really how much it means to me. Because, just hearing Alan and being in it for a few weeks, yeah, it brings it to light, and it creates a sense of urgency, right? And it raises the stakes because anything can happen, and then all of this is left undone. So that's how it was really beneficial to me. That, you know, I gotta get things right, voice some things, thanks.
I think too, like a lot of us, even some of us, the ladies who were talking, like this age is crucial, right? So this mid-40s to early 50s age demographic that a lot of us are in right now, like this is the start of a lot of people we know dying, right? I know that sounds horrible, but like our parents are going, our loved ones are going, like our friends are going, and we are in this whirlwind of, oh shit, like this is just gonna keep going. And this is one lesson that nobody told us. Like nobody said, everybody's gonna start dying and it's just part of life now. And so I think any time in this decade of our lives where we can find ways to process that and meet each other in those moments is vital. I just think it's vital right now. So I appreciate it from that aspect of just being willing to observe, and nothing is ever resolved. They're just sitting in it and finding vulnerability together, and I think that's the best we can do.
And I think that when theater's at its best, it affects a change, right? There's something in you that wants change. And to that end, what is happening in this audience is talking about action in individual lives. And so I think that's a success. I think that's your answer, is you're doing it.
I think one of the most enjoyable parts of our very brief rehearsal process was, I think, after our first rehearsal, where we just all sat around and started talking about our fathers and all the stories, and just a small group of people. You know, it was very moving. It was just, you know, all of a sudden we're just together, and all of a sudden we're sharing these stories that we connect with in some way. So it was very meaningful.
And to answer Dave's question, does this help you deal with grief? The whole time I was thinking about things that I've dealt with, but I was also thinking about things, the grief that other people in the room, because I feel like this is a lot of people know each other. Stories, I feel like I need to go back and read this because I started going off on you know, but the grief that other people in the room have felt. And I think as an empathetic crowd, you know, thinking about, so I may have not paid attention to the whole thing, but that's because I was thinking about the grief that all of us have experienced in this room. So the answer is yes, not just our own grief, but the grief of the people that we love. So then,
And I do think that it would be, that it was very helpful. I think it will reach a masses of people. Going back to what you were saying, at our age of 50-something, it seems as though now that grief and like we're losing people much faster now than it was when we were much younger. It seems like it's coming very quickly. If it's not directly, it's people around us. So we're constantly being affected by it. But this kind of storytelling, play, or what have you, I think it covers a large mass of grieving. It's almost like a counseling, and you're getting it through the play. And I was going to ask him, ask Jonathan, where do you think about going into maybe counseling? I'm thinking that with grief counseling is something that you probably could tap on, because as you said, you got some that are going into it for the money, but have someone to go into it genuinely to help, to recover, to help someone. That is something that's needed.
I took care of my mom until she passed about 12 years. And
What'd you say?
I said I took care of my mother for about 12 years. And the thing that I learned in helping her each day when there was no one else around me and her was to just take in the moment. Don't think about when is it going to be. And out of that came those 12 years where I kept saying, okay, you have something else to teach me. Okay, what do you got? What do you got? And she would say things, and I learned things about her. I would ask her questions. What's your favorite color? Because these are things that I didn't know. And so the process that I learned, I took Death and Dying in undergrad school. What is it? Mary Kubler-Ross with the stages of death and everything. And so my thing that I learned is to, yes, like was said, to know that it's coming, but it could have been coming from me as well as her. She could have outlived me, but I just started not thinking about that, not focusing on that, and just enjoying the day. And if she would say something about my father who was deceased, that he was gonna come in and say something about me singing through the house, I would say, well, if he comes in, I will come back and get you. Because I'm gonna leave the house temporarily if he comes back. So I made it, like we hear some of the stars say, what's his name, Jim Carrey, how he would always just make things fun with his mother. And so I just learned to do that. And then if I needed to cry, if I needed to scream, if I needed to go and have a drink, I would go out of the room and do that. But the thing was to be there for her and to help her, because we were only two in there at the time. And so all of that said, and the movie that I watched was called A Good Person. And the whole thing was about just coming to grips with grief and the person that had caused that grief and everything. And with dealing with my mother, I just learned so much about her and myself in that process. So my thing was just to be there and learn.
Someone over here?
Oh, yeah, this is just personal thing, it's more in terms of feedback about sort of how to play to help audiences deal with grief. Given our responses to it and the, don't need to make generalizations, the relative age of those in the audience, I would think this conversation would resonate more if it is actually a conversation between a baby boomer and Gen X, not 20 and 40-year-old, not Gen X and a millennial or Gen Z, because that's like it's us. It's like the 40s and 50s-year-olds who are going to resonate with the 70, 80-year-old parents, and that. So, in my mind, the casting anyway would not be 20 to 40. It would be 40 to 70.
All right, we'll have one more comment, and then I think we're going to have to call it a night. Okay.
Are we Dane? You want to?
Or you want
Hey,
to?
Dave, if you have any other questions, you could put it out. And
Yeah.
we could
Oh,
write
you're gonna
to
get
you.
a survey.
He's got your email addresses.
I'll say that I think for me, one thing I've been learning about from Pretchell is the grief and praise part of it. So by having someone to share your grief with and not keeping it bottled up to where it becomes anger and anxiety, by sharing it with someone, that allows it to become something beautiful and become a praiseful act of music and poetry and theater and the things that make us human. So that for me is one of the largest takeaways of the process. To share, talk about it, be there for each other, listen, not be all judgmental, but just be someone to receive. And then let it blossom into the beauty and the praise for the grief, because that means we're alive.
All right, thank you, everyone.